We are in 2 Samuel 23. Second Samuel 23. We believe that every word of God is pure, tried in a furnace 7 times. When we make our expositions of the scriptures, inevitably we will come to lists of men. I'll never forget, we were traveling up in Tennessee one time and dropped in on a Reformed church, and they were reading through, like we do, read scriptures, and they were reading through a book, and they had gotten to the genealogy that day. And that poor fella was butchering the names just like I butcher them, and apologized afterwards that, well, you know, it's the word of God, and we're like, it's okay, brother. It's okay. We believe every word of God is pure. And that's why I like the self-pronouncing Bibles. At least I have a chance at it, though I still don't do too good. But we come here to these mighty men. We've been looking at different aspects of them. Some of them were given a little bit of information, and then I want us to close out this chapter. And there's a long list of mighty men. And I do want us to realize that the list he's giving us here are mighty men of battle. These are military men. So it may discourage our hearts to think, well, I'm probably not going to be able to stand in a field of lentils and kill 800 people that are coming at me. That's probably not most of our gifts. But I do want us to recognize that, you know, God had those men for that purpose around David in that day for various reasons. And a lot of these men that we'll be looking at today, the first one was dead already, which shows us the frailty of life. They're mighty men, but they die too. And then there's piles of them that we only know their name and know none of their works whatsoever. So that a lot of them are unknown as far as the history of what they did. Some of them, we have a few things on them, and then we have at the end, as Miss Tara, as we were talking about it one day, weeks back, we have the punctuation of Uriah the Hittite, who was done wrong as a mighty man. So it's an eclectic gathering there of different men under different circumstances and what we can know about them. We just read together Romans chapter 16, and that's some of the application I make when I go from this list and then go into the New Testament. There are mighty men and women of faith. So these men had a particular calling, and they fulfilled that calling for the glory of God as far as we know. We don't know all these men and what their relationship to God was. But no doubt there were believers among them, and David had a strong influence for the truth among his troops. And I can imagine that he wanted to gather believing men around him, especially those who were his mightiest men, because he knew where the source of power and victory and intervention was, that it was the Lord, not mighty men. He wrote in one of his psalms that the mighty man is not to take, trust in his strength or in the horse, that the king doesn't find his trust there, because all of that can be defeated. So we come to chapter 23, and what I want us to do, first of all, is make a running commentary, as it were, through these particular folks that he gives to us in this chapter, and then make applications along the way. One of the applications is, as we read about these and we try to dig in and find out about some folks, that everybody does have a story. And you find out, we talk about that in life oftentimes. People have a story. And there's things that you don't know about them. And that's why when we meet folks and we try to minister the light of the gospel to them, or we meet fellow believers and we may find some things unusual perhaps about those fellow believers, we don't always know the background of those folks. We don't know what they've passed through. We don't know the struggles that they have had. And so we need to always be sure that we are full of grace as we bear the truth to others as well. So I've been teasing Miss Ruth. She was in the hospital, and there's something, I was telling some of the nurses, there's something that you don't know about Ruth that probably a lot of people here don't know either, unless I've told you the story already. That Miss Ruth, when she was much younger, back in the early 40s, or late 40s, early 1950s, she had the first cooking show in Alabama on television. And she was the first cook that went on TV to show recipes, and was working for, it was like a gas company that sold stoves, and she would go to houses and help them with their stoves. But I say that just to say it is an interesting tidbit, but just we have a lot in our backgrounds, that the Lord has brought us through. And what we are admonished by these texts is that these were mighty men, and that we read in the New Testament as well. We read a list like Romans 16 of men and women in the New Testament who are a part of working in the kingdom of God. And we have Hebrews 11, which also harkens back to the Old Testament and says, here's some mighty men and women as well. So I want us to keep that in mind, and we will, by the grace of the Lord, look at some of these and gain some benefit. We'll be looking at what their name means. So in a number of them, it's an uncertain derivation that they don't know where it came from. Some of them are pretty funny names, and I'm not sure, of course, that there's folks out there now that have some pretty funny names, and you don't always know what they were thinking when folks give names out, because one of them in here, his name, they say in the Hebrew, means scabby. So I'm not sure if that's because of the way he was born or what, but God has his people, and here are his mighty men. Verse 24, we'll begin. Verse 24 is where we left off. Asahel, the brother of Joab, was one of the 30. Asahel. We remember Asahel because he was the one who was pursuing Abner, and Abner told him to turn away because Abner was much more experienced and Asahel did not, and he died that day. But he is remembered here in God's book. And I think there is a sense that we have to keep a right balance, that there can be an honoring of the dead, of our fathers. There is an honor thy father and mother, not only those that are living now, but those who have died as well. And God, in his book, at times honors men. It's not to the exclusion of or because something outside of God, but he does it in his word. So we need to have a proper balance there. But there is a certainty of our mortality, no matter how mighty we are, no matter how swift of foot, as Asahel was, probably more than hardly any men, there is a certainty of our mortality. The other thing we see in the list of men, and the next one is El-Hanan. El-Hanan. You'll see part of the word is God, or some aspect of God in the Hebrew words. We give our children names. At times it's just a sound we like of that name. At times it has a meaning itself that we would wish upon the name of a child, a character aspect. In the Old Testament, at times the name could be prophetic, or at times it was something that they saw in that child. But El-Hanan is God is gracious. God is gracious. And we go back to 2 Samuel 21. 2 Samuel 21 and verse 19, we read, and there was again a battle in Gob with the Philistines, where El-Hanan, the son of Jeroham, a Bethlehemite, slew the brother of Goliath the Gittite, the staff of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. So here is one of David's, and apparently it was perhaps a neighbor of David's too, because it's the son of Dodo of Bethlehem. So perhaps a neighbor of David's from his hometown, that he knew this young man as well. And David not only slew Goliath, but this man slew the brother of Goliath as well. But his name means God is gracious. God is gracious. It is nice if we can trace our name and the etymology of our name to something. I remember as a boy looking up etymologies of Mark. Mark's a very plain name, but some of them said it meant determination and things of that nature. And that helped me. I used to have a little plaque where it had Mark on there and has determination with a little mouse who is jousting and going to keep on trying. But in my own soul, in my own spirit, I would think upon that, and I would want to be determined and not give up. I wanted to be a person who didn't give up. 2 Samuel 23 and verse 25, we have there Shammah, the Harodite, Elika, the Harodite as well. Shammah means ruin and destruction. In 2 Samuel 23:11, we read, "And after him was Shammah the son of Agi, the Harahite, and the Philistines were gathered together in a troop where there was a piece of ground full of lentils, and the people fled from the Philistines, but he stood in the midst of the ground and defended it." So we've talked about this man. His name means ruin or destruction, and interesting, another man in this same verse also called the Harodite. It's Elika, the Harodite. And that word, that name, they say, means the God of rejection. God of rejection, which makes me wonder if he was born at a low time in Israel, perhaps under Saul and some of the troublesome times that Saul brought on the people. The Hebrews were not reticent to name their children after hard providences. We find that in the scriptures. You remember when Rachel died on the way to Bethlehem. She died before they got there. And when she named the child, as she knew she was in her death throes, Ben-Omi, which was son of my sorrow. But of course, then they changed the name to Benjamin, son of my right hand, so that he wouldn't have to be stuck with son of my sorrow the entire time. But it's not unusual for them, even under hard providences, to speak very plainly about those hard providences. You know, we have Naomi saying, "Don't call me Naomi anymore, call me Mara. The Lord has dealt bitterly with me." And they speak very forthrightly about the circumstances they are in as well. So interesting that they have that kind of forthrightness with the Lord, their relationship with the Lord, and even in the naming of their children at times. Verse 26, we have the name Helez or Kelaz, the Paltite, and then also Ira, the son of Ikesh, the Tekite. So we have Helez, which means strength. That's a good name for a mighty man. Sometimes we find that names fit very well the calling of a man. And then Lira means watchfulness, which would be another good name for a mighty man. Both of those good names for Christians. We need to have the strength of the Lord with us, and we also need to be very watchful in our lives. Christians of all people are watchful people. They are people who are on the watch because they are not the deceived people of this world. So I find that to be true with Christians. That's why Christians get into so much trouble in this world, is because they are not easily deceived, and they're very careful, and they don't buy everything that comes down the pike, as they understand too much about the depravity of man. Now Ira, the son of Ikesh, the Tekoite, in 1 Chronicles, you can turn there for a moment, and I want to talk about something here with the names of some of these men. Actually, a number of them are given elsewhere. And these lists are not exactly the same in these two books. That doesn't bother me a bit, because, as one of the writers said, mighty men would come and go. You would have mighty men that would die in battle, and then you'd have them replaced, and that sort of thing. And also in the scriptures, I think you all know that oftentimes people could have more than one name ascribed to them. So don't let that trip you up just because there's differences there. I imagine some of you have had a couple different names or nicknames or different things. Some people are named with 4 or 5 names at their birth. And so it was the same back then. 1 Chronicles 27, right in verse 9, we read, the 6th captain for the 6th month was Erah, the son of Ikesh, the Tekoite, and in his course were 24,000. So listen to Matthew Henry's note on this. He says we have here, talking about in this chapter, we have an account of the regulation of the militia of the kingdom. David was himself a man of war and had done great things with the sword. He had brought into the field great armies. And now here we are told how he marshaled them when God had given him rest from his enemies. He did not keep them all together, for that would have been a hardship on them and the country. Yet he did not disband and disperse them all, for then it would have left the kingdom naked, and his people would have forgotten the arts of war, wherein they had been instructed. He therefore contrived to keep up a constant force, and yet not a standing army. The model is very prudent. He kept up 24,000 constantly in arms. I suppose in a body and disciplined in one part or other of the kingdom, the freeholders carrying their own arms and bearing their own charges while they were up. This was a sufficient strength for securing of the public peace and safety. Those that are Israelites indeed must learn war, for we have enemies to grapple with, whom we are concerned constantly to stand upon our guard. So basically, what is happening is David is changing them out every month. Every month he has another 24,000, and he puts a leader over them. This man that we've just talked about is the head of 24,000 men, so that's quite a responsibility. All Christians have responsibilities, men and women. We all have responsibilities. Our responsibility may be for one, and actually that's sufficient. One soul is sufficient to fill our hands with things to do. Others are given larger charges. This particular man had 24,000. Henry goes on to say every course had a commander-in-chief besides sub-officers that were rulers over the thousands, hundreds, and fifties. One general officer to each course or legion. But it was a very wise way to keep up an army and yet not keep the expense and trouble of a standing army at that time. Verse 27. In verse 27, Abiezer, the Anathothite, and Mebunai, the Hushathite. Abiezer means father of help, father of help. In the Cambridge Bible for Schools and Colleges, they write, Abiezer of Ananoth and Benjamin, the modern village of Anatah, 3 miles northeast of Jerusalem. It was a priestly city, the home of Abiathar and the birthplace of the prophet Jeremiah. And so we have this man who is called the Father of Help, a good name. And a number of these names have to do with help. When we go to Romans 16, we read of how many of those people that Paul simply said, they helped me. They were helpers in the gospel. It's a good thing to be a helper. We teach our children to be helpers, not to be troublemakers or not to go against what we're trying to do. And so to be a helper, I think, is one of the finest designations you can get. And Paul often spoke of that with the people. He's a fellow worker, a fellow laborer. He's a helper. He helps me in the work that we're doing in the gospel. And then the second name in verse 27 is Mebunai, which means to build up, to build up. And that's also a great New Testament concept as well. We call it edification, edification, to build one another up in the most holy faith. He was of Judah. He was of the Messianic tribe. Then, verse 28, we have Zalman and we have Maharai. Zalman means a shady place, place of shade. And one of the mountains in Israel were called Zalman because it was a place of much trees. So I can't think of a more pleasant name than that. a shady place. I know when I'm around the Alabama sun, I sure am looking for that. I'm looking for a shady place. And how wonderful it is when you're hot and tired and it's draining you, and you can just go underneath one of God's trees and you find the temperature has just decreased by about 15 degrees. And what a blessing that is. May we all be Zalmans. May we be a shady place, a place where people can find rest, where we bring them into the peace of God. The saints of all people should be a peaceful people, a people who, when you're around them, it's not being stirred up and agitated to every kind of thing, but you find in that person peace and rest. That God help us to be that way, to be peaceful, to be at rest, so that we can be a calming influence to others around us as well. The world needs that very much. He was also he was the 10th captain for the 10th month, over 24,000. No, that was the next guy, Maharai. Now his name means hasty or hurry. And I don't know if that meant because his birth, they almost, came out, it was delivered so quickly, they named him hasty, or if they just saw that in his character. The man who established the Russian Bible Society, his biography is called A Man in a Hurry, because he was always had something to do for the Lord. And it was the next thing and the next thing. And that's good. We should be busy about the Lord's work. Not hurried in the sense of harried, not hurried as harried, but hurry in the sense of redeeming the time, and we have something to do. We have purpose in our life. We read in the scriptures, the root of this word is used when it says that Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, "Quickly make meals for these visitors," one of them being a Christophany. And in Genesis 19, when the angels came, he told Lot, "Hurry, let's get out of this place." And when Rebekah, the servant Eleazar, came, she said, "Drink, my lord," and she hurried and let down her pitcher and gave him drink. She was anxious to serve. She was anxious to quench his thirst and then to take care of all the camels as well. That's a good thing. It's a good thing to be in that kind of hurry, that we have this desire to help others and to further the kingdom in that way. Now, verse 29, we have Haleb, the son of Baanah, and also Ittai, the son of Ribai, out of Gibeah, the children of Benjamin. The second guy is a Benjamite, which is a testimony to God's grace upon the people, that though Saul was a Benjamite, David had a number of Benjamites who were actually a part of his fighting force, and also shows the draw that David had as a man of God. The first name, Haleb, means fatness. Now, to our mind, as we're living in the 21st century and we have a epidemic of obesity in our country, when we read the word fatness, it may have a negative connotation to us. But actually, as you probably know, and as you've read the scriptures plenty of times, that term fatness, as it's given to us in the Old Testament, it's the idea of great provision. Great provision. So in Genesis 27:28, there was this prophecy, "Therefore God give thee the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth, and plenty of corn and wine." Psalm 36:8, "They shall abundantly be satisfied with the fatness of thy house," of God's house, "and thou shalt make them drink of the river of thy pleasures." Psalm 63:5, "My soul shall be satisfied as with marrow and fatness." Psalm 65:11, "You crown the year with thy goodness, and thy paths drop fatness." So it's the idea of great provision that God has provided plentifully for us. So he was named that. Perhaps they were rejoicing at his birth. Perhaps he was one of many children. I don't know. But that's what his name means. Verse 30. In verse 30, we have Benaiah, which is Yah has built. Yah has built. God has built. It reminded me of Psalm 127 when it says, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain to build it. Except the Lord keeps the city, the watchman wakes but in vain. So God is the one who builds, and that is our trust, and that is our hope. Even when we may be in the midst of troublesome times, let us not forget that Yah has built. He is a builder. And then Hiddai is of uncertain derivation. He comes from a place of brooks or streams, and I think that's lovely as well. Brooks and streams are to us scenes that are heavenly streams, scenes, and even heaven itself is spoken of with streams coming out of the throne of God. Verse 31, we have Abi Alban, which means father of strength or valiant father. I don't know if that name was prophetic or merited, but it's a good name. It is father of strength. Verse 32, Eli Ahba, God will hide. God will hide. We know that this is, at times, God himself hides himself, as we see in the Psalms, and the psalmist cries out for God to make himself known or to show himself again. Sometimes God will hide his people, like he hid Moses and protected Moses when he was a child. And also in 1 Kings 18:4, Obadiah says, for it was when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord, Obadiah took 100 prophets and he hid them. That's the part of that word, hid them by 50 in a cave. And we are also hidden under the wings of God, and we are hidden in God himself. So it's a good name. Verse 33, once again we have Shema, and this is consternation again, ruin, astonishment. And then Ahayim is the brother of the mother. The brother of the mother. Interesting name. Verse 34, Eli Philet is God of deliverance. Another great name. The God of deliverance. And that's probably one of the most common names given to God. He's the God of salvation. He's the God of deliverance, the one who delivers us. And it's something that we fall back upon over and over again in our lives. The name Abba, the son of the Makathite, that is of uncertain derivation as well. And then we have Eliam, which is God of the people. God of the people, the people's God. Perhaps a reference to the covenant, that I will be your God and you will be my people. And among them we find this one, Eliam, is the son of Ahithophel. Ahithophel. As one commentator said, he was a faithful son of a rebel father. Because you remember the counsel of Ahithophel had to be worked against because he was counseling to destroy David. Probably because there was a relationship there with Bathsheba as well. In verse 35, we have Hezrai, which means an enclosure, and then Parai, which I find to be one of the most interesting. It means to yawn. So not sure what to say about that, but they say that's what it says. Verse 36, Igal is avenger, which might be a good name for a mighty man as well. And Bani, it means to build or built. Interesting that form of that word is used 11 out of the 14 times it's used in Ezra and Nehemiah, where all the building was going on. This man's name was built. Verse 37, Zelek means a split, a cracking, a fissure, a long, narrow opening. He was an Ammonite. And Naharai, another interesting word, it means to snore, actually. And he was the armor bearer to Joab. So Joab may have had some restless nights. I'm not sure. Maybe that's what made Joab so irritable. Verse 38, Ira, again, means wakefulness. Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. Lord, remember David in all his afflictions, how he swore unto the Lord and vowed to the mighty God of Jacob, surely I will not come into the tabernacle of my house or go up to my bed. I will not give sleep to mine eyes or slumber to mine eyelids until I find a place for the Lord, a habitation for the mighty God of Jacob. May we be wakeful in that way. May we say, I will not rest until God be established in the earth. That really is where we're supposed to be at as far as our lives. So long as we're here, we are not to rest until Christ is known and the gospel goes forth. Let us do everything we can to make that happen by the grace of God. And then our friend Garib, whom I talked about early on, his name meant scabby. Scabby. Verse 39. Uriah, there's our friend whom we spent a couple of messages on. And his name means the flame of Yah. The flame of Yah. He was the flame of God. And he went out in a flame of fire. He went out burning in his service to God. Thomas Scott says the list closes with Uriah, who met with a base reward for his services. And Joab is not mentioned in this group, whether he's a part of this 37 or makes up the 37th. He's the general of them. John Wesley had a good note. He writes, all the good soldiers of Jesus have their names better preserved than even these, for they are written in heaven in the Lamb's book of life. This honor have all the saints. And Thomas White says, every true believer is one of those worthies, fighting under the banner of Jesus, strong in the Lord in the power of his might, victorious over the powers of sin and Satan, and written great, not in the annals of time, indeed, but in the annals of eternity, in the book of life, in the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Lord, may my name be found written there. Men spend their lives to have their names written in the earth, to be written about, to be remembered, to be known, and 99.999% of them never are. How few names are actually remembered, and oftentimes not for the best thing. But the saints are in a blessed state. If my name can be remembered in heaven, it does not matter whether it's named in earth or not. Hebrews chapter 11. Let's go there for just a moment and make a couple applications as we think about the list of the worthies, the mighty men of God. We've already read through Romans 16 and saw all of Paul's helpers. In Hebrews 11, and you can spend time on your own just meditating on these, I'm sure you have, in times past. When he comes to kind of summarize some of these things, and when I think about these worthies, it starts with Abel. Why was Abel a mighty man of God? Because in the face of having a brother who was not in the faith, and who no doubt put pressure on him for his faith, he remained faithful even to death. And I think about Abraham. Abraham was a man who's called the man of faith. He was a mighty man of God too. Now he was a general and had a little army that he rescued Lot with, but he is known really for his prowess was the fact that when God converted him in Ur of the Chaldees, and then God told him to go to a place which he did not know, and he obeyed the Lord. He had faith in God, even though he was going where he didn't know he was to be. And then all his time traveling through the land of Canaan, and he was alone in that land. He set up the altar of God wherever he went, just faithfully honoring the Lord in that way. And then he had the incident of the fact that he was so old he couldn't have a child. And so in that, he was found faithful as well, that he believed God when God said, you're going to have a son. And God gave him a son. So he was a mighty man of faith. And then God told him to kill his son. And in that, he too was faithful. He believed that if he did kill him, that God was going to raise him from the dead. And God didn't put him through that, but God did prove out his faith. He was a mighty man of God. So you don't have to be out there in a lentil field killing 800 of the enemy to be a mighty man or woman of faith. It may be your calling, but our calling to be mighty men and women is to believe God and to have faith in God with whatever God sets before us. Sarah did as well. In here, there are numerous ones, but I want to go to verse 33. Let's look at how he wraps it up. We could look at so many of these. Rahab's in there too, verse 31. He says in verse 32, "What shall I more say? For the time would fail to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions." Think about these things. They are mighty men and women of God who subdue evil kingdoms, And the closest that comes to home is to subdue our own evil kingdom of our own remnants of our own heart, to mortify the deeds of the flesh. And it says that they not only subdued evil kingdoms, so they fought against evil, but they wrought righteousness. They established a righteous rule. In other words, they upheld the law of God. Do you uphold the law of God? Do you love the law of God? Oh, how I love thy law. It is my meditation all the day. And then he goes on to say, and they obtained promises. This is to be a mighty man or woman of God, to obtain the promises of God, to find the promises of God in the scriptures, to believe them, and to obtain them. Some of those you won't obtain until eternal glory, but some of those are obtained now as we trust the Lord. And then it speaks of some of these experienced divine intervention in their lives. Now here they give some of the greatest stories in the scriptures, stopping the mouths of lions. Daniel who would not bow and who would not change. And there was divine intervention that kept him alive. And then quenching the violence of fire, I suppose the 3 Hebrew children he's speaking of. Others who would not bow and who would follow the Lord, and there was divine intervention. Escape the edge of the sword, that probably could be applied to many. There was Gideon's 300. But there is the experience of divine intervention. And it is a blessed thing to experience divine intervention. I have no expectation of being put in a lion's den and God saving me from that. But I can say that in other ways, and smaller in our lives, we experience divine intervention as we look at the providence of God in our lives and we see how God has helped us. He has intervened in a situation, oftentimes not in a way that we expected at all. And then it speaks of out of weakness made strong. Out of weakness made strong. And Paul says that's where his strength was, and his recognition of his own weakness. And I think of Samson. Samson didn't do what he did because he went to the gym and was a bodybuilder. Samson was wrought upon by the Spirit of God. He did feats that you couldn't do. I don't care how long you went to the gym. So that's divine aid. Out of our weakness and out of our frailty, God gives us somehow strength to do his will and to carry out his purposes. We see that with David and Goliath as well. Waxed valiant in fight. Their spirits were animated by the Spirit of God to fight the good fight of faith, to defeat the enemy, both actively and passively at times. When we are valiant in the fight, it may be in an active way, it may be in a passive way, like all the martyrs that we read of, that in a passive way they fought the good fight of faith as well and persevered to the end. We sometimes win battles on earth with justice prevailing, We sometimes win battles by maintaining truth even though justice doesn't prevail on earth, by persevering in the faith and acting out our faith in Christ. In verse 35, it says that women receive their dead to life. We read about that in 2 Kings 4. This woman, that is such a great chapter and such a great story about that woman who trusted God and sought the furtherance of his kingdom. She saw her dead come to life, and we could do an exposition on that text. And that woman was proactive. That woman was going to God, and she was expecting something to happen. The barren woman who conceived and brought back her son after he died. The end of 35 through 37, it talks about at the end of 35, others tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. You know, when we think of torture, we have thoughts of Voice of the Martyrs. We have thoughts of John Fox's Book of Martyrs and what happened during Bloody Mary's reign. But the reality is that this took place in the Old Testament as well. These people were tortured, okay? This is not new. The Spanish Inquisition was not new. The Roman Catholic Church didn't invent all this stuff. This is what that evil has done. Anti-Christian powers have done from the beginning of time, from the time in which Abel's throat was slit by his brother. So they're the martyrs of the Old Testament. And we were looking at some different ones. Athaliah, who destroyed all the seed royal. Ahab, who killed Naboth for his vineyard. Jezebel also killed some of God's prophets. 2 Chronicles 24. Second Chronicles 24. In verse 20, and the Spirit of God came upon Zechariah the son of Jehoiada, the priest, which stood above the people, and said to them, Thus saith God, why do you transgress the commandments of the Lord, that you cannot prosper? Because you have forsaken the Lord, he has forsaken you. And they conspired against him and stoned him with stones at the commandment of the king, in the court of the house of the Lord. And Joash the king remembered not the kindness that Jehoiada his father had done to him, but slew his son. And when he died, he said, The Lord look upon it, and the Lord require it. And the Lord did. The Lord did. So we read that at times in the Old Testament, the blood flowed in the city of Jerusalem with martyrs. So this is not something new. So that he says in verse 38, of whom the world is not worthy. The world is never worthy of the saints. Because they seek first the kingdom of God, while there's this other kingdom, the anti-Christian kingdom, which is always fighting against Christ. They were put out of their cities, put out of their towns, put out of their villages, put out by those who were supposedly religious, put out of families. They had to live in dens and caves at times, and it still takes place. But they had this. God gave them a good report. It was good to have a good report card, wasn't it? I don't know, some of you are old enough that I went to public school, and you had to carry home with you. They actually trusted you to do this. You had to carry home with you the report card. In an elementary school, it wasn't just a report card of numbers or letters. They made comments on that too. I remember fourth grade. I remember that comment. Mark lacks self-control. And I did. I was a clown, and I liked to make people laugh in the class, and so she got me. But it wasn't a good report. God gave these people a good report card. God approved of these people. He said, these are mine. They belong to me. They are faithful. Yes, they are weak. They sin and they have to repent, but they belong to me. They are persevering by my preserving them. And they were God's witnesses in their own day. That's what you are. We look at this list of mighty men. We see them doing some of these extraordinary deeds. Well, we are called to do extraordinary things too, to be faithful to God, to serve the Lord in our own generation, to do the mundane things that are necessary in order to honor God in our families, in our own personal life, all of these things. That's what makes a mighty man, a mighty woman of God. And may God strengthen us for that. That God may give us a good report card as well. Well done. Good and faithful servant is all we want. Let's close with a hymn.